Welcome to Big Blend Radio's California Employment Law Podcast featuring San Diego attorney Ward Heinrichs. Welcome, everyone. You know, every fourth Wednesday we get to chat with Ward Heinrichs, who's a California employment attorney based in San Diego. In fact, his website is bestemploymentattorneysandiego.com, so you know where to go. But we also have a special guest that he's invited on the show today. And this is because we're going to be talking about employers and employees in regards to the world of immigration. We know that there's a lot of crackdowns happening with ICE and there's federal enforcement. So we're going to talk about that specifically for California. So we have Christina Tong joining us from the law offices of Jane Oak. You can learn more at lawofficesofjaneoak.com. All the links are in the episode notes, but welcome, Christina. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Ward. Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Thanks. It's good to have you on the show. Ward, how are you doing? Is it sunny and happy in San Diego?
Yeah, it is actually sunny and happy in San Diego. We went through a heat spell where, it was kind of muggy and the temperature was way up. It's still a little muggy, getting a little rain out east, but it's got a lot more comfortable. And I'm taking my RV out into the mountains tomorrow and doing my thing out there for a few days. So I'm looking
Awesome.
forward to the good weather to continue.
Awesome. Awesome. I like to hear this. Well, we're in Bend, Oregon today. And that's where you went mountain biking, didn't you? And had some adventures out here. But
Arm and bend.
you bend your arm and bend. That's what people do. But yeah, immigration law. This is such a huge topic right now. We're seeing a lot of different stories of raids. I mean, I even know a doctor friend who, they're going through the hospitals. I have friends in the wine industry that are concerned and have actually one of their grape guys, like he really knows everything about the grapes for an entire wine region, has had a business for over 30 years and now he's back over the border. He has a family. So there's all these different stories coming out across the country. And I know California, is also dealing with it because you have such a huge agricultural industry too. So I think this is really important to talk about today. So Christina, really glad to have you because this is going to be an interesting balance, especially between employer and employee. So Ward, I wanted to say, have you heard anything on the employer side? Because should employers be concerned right now?
They certainly can be. It depends on what industry they're in and who they employ. There are some of my clients have almost all their employees actually speak Spanish as a first language. And so there's the appearance of maybe some type of potential violation of federal law. So that type of person, I know I've talked to them, they are concerned. And the concern is raids by ICE or other federal agencies trying to look for undocumented aliens.
So as an employer, when you're hiring someone, is there a process of making sure that you're safe when you're hiring someone in regards to are they legally allowed to be hired?
Yeah, I honestly, I think Christina probably knows a little more about that. And if I'm wrong, Christina, you can throw it back to me. But I think you probably know a little more about that.
Let's play ball.
Generally, if you're an employer, you need your employee to fill out and sign a form called the I-9, the I-9. And generally, if you have forms that begin with the letter I, they are immigration related. And the I-9 simply shows that the employee is authorized to work in the U.S. So this could be either they came in with a particular kind of visa that allows them to do certain types of work, or they have a work permit based on some other status that they have, or they're a green card holder or a U.S. citizen. So together with the I-9, there's a section at the bottom of the I-9 that tells an employer what types of documents would prove the employee's ability to work. And if Lisa, you were talking about ICE raids. Generally, when ICE audits a work site for immigration compliance, they're looking specifically at the I-9s and whether those I-9s are up to date and are backed up by acceptable documentation.
Okay. So it's not like, so when I say a raid, it's not like, because I think that's been a term that's been used and I haven't been in one. So it just sounds like the SWAT team is coming in. That's how it feels like saying that. And is it like that? Or is it like some, like a health inspector coming to a bed and breakfast and looking at the kitchen?
It's both. There's three different general categories of visits that ICE could make on a work site. I'm going to call them a visit, an audit, and a raid. ICE, from the beginning of the current administration, around like January to March, I would say, they had a quota, a national quota of making 1,500 arrests per week. That quota has doubled in the recent months. So now it's 3,000 arrests per week. What we saw was at the beginning of the administration, ICE was picking up individuals, going to homes and just kind of essentially profiling people that they saw driving around or walking on the street. And that's where you got a lot more people who actually had status being swept up in these mass detentions. Recently, because of this increased quota, ICE has begun to cast a wider net, so to speak. And that's when we began to see work sites being visited, audited, raided. The differences between a visit, an audit, and a raid is that a visit is essentially a fishing trip, right? Like Ward can probably identify with this, but it's ICE trying to continue to meet their quota by going to a work site and just kind of poking around and seeing who might talk to them and who, for the most part, might not be aware of their rights and what they have to and do not have to say, and trying to get intel or doing surveillance on a particular neighborhood. That's a visit. For an ICE visit, workers generally don't need to interact with ICE very much, and they don't have a lot of actual authority to do anything. That doesn't prevent them from trying to do things, but that's a visit. The next level up would be an audit, and this is where ICE would send something called a notice of inspection to the employer, giving them a heads up that they're going to come in 3 business days to audit all of the I-9s and make sure that the employer is in compliance with immigration-related employment law. And then the raid. So the raid would be usually ICE is coming with a judicial warrant issued by a U.S. district court, signed by a judge, with specific language in the warrant saying what they are authorized to look for, what areas of the worksite they're allowed to go into that are not public. And with a raid, generally they're looking for specific people, or they know that there is non-compliance that has risen to the level where a federal judge would give them permission to raid a worksite.
Oh, wow. So, and at that point, they could actually take people away from the works.
They can take people away regardless what kind of visit it is. If you have a staffer who hasn't been trained by the employer and is saying too much about the immigration status of themselves or their coworkers, ICE could have whatever they would call probable cause to go poking around or picking people up, just based on suspicion of not having the U.S. government's permission to be.
Okay, so Ward, going over to you for the employer, knowing that this kind of thing can happen, this is something do you have to be careful, like the communication between, the employer, the management, HR, everyone has to kind of be careful how they're communicating with the employees too, right? Because that could get touchy, right? Because can't the employer get in trouble if they've hired people that are not of legal?
I see what you're getting at. Yes. Well, I'm not exactly sure where that question's going. I'm going to say this, though, that if an employer suspects that he or she has people on their payrolls that are not legal, that's a concern. It's a much greater concern now than ever before. But normally what you see is the employer is pretty good about trying to get the proper documents. And the real question is, are those proper documents authentic or were they manufactured? And again, Christina may know more than I do about this. I don't actually deal with authentic or manufactured documents. That would probably be something more that Christina would deal with, but I know it exists. So I think the employer, though, is covered as long as the document looks pretty decent. If the document doesn't, then I think they probably have a problem. So I don't think it's so much how you communicate with your employees. I mean, I think you either have a suspicion or you don't. And if you do, I suppose what you really need to focus on is, well, what do I do now? And do I try to continue as I am? Or do I say, all right, we got to change things around here? And reporting yourself to ICE and saying, oh, I know I got someone, that would be very tricky too.
Yeah, so you can't necessarily just turn around and fire them for it either, right?
Well, not in California. You got to be really careful about that because that could be an unlawful termination depending on the reason for it. And I suppose here's the dilemma. You've got a document that's saying they're here legally, and for some reason you're suspecting that, well, maybe this document isn't quite right, when that employee may go to the labor commissioner or may go to the Department of Fair Employment and Housing and say, they terminated me for my race. And now you got a big old problem. Now, of course, in between time, if that employee has been picked up by ICE, well, maybe your problem's gone away. I don't know. Yeah, it certainly could create havoc for the business as well.
Wow. So what about businesses that are doing cash under the table? Because you know that there are, especially for day labor, right? Come on, we know that this
Yeah,
exists.
no, it happens. Yes.
I'm sure Home Depot's changed things a bit. Sorry, not Home Depot, the actual company itself, but people used to line up for work. You
I
know
know
what
what
I'm
you're
talking
talking
about?
about. We all know what you're
Okay.
talking
And Home Depot did not come after me, but it is true from years ago. It used to happen. It's day labor, right? So, but those were still also being documented as far as I know. But some people would just go, hey, here, I'll give you 50 or $100 if you come help me with my home project. So that is also, that's a no-no for everybody, right? Everybody can get in trouble with that if you get caught.
Yeah,
That,
again, I don't know the immigration rules nearly like Christina, but I
okay,
would say
Christina.
that's probably or possibly harboring a fugitive, that kind of thing.
Oh my
Housing
gosh.
and someone who's not documented, you're not allowed to do that, right, Christina? You can't just say you're undocumented, so stay in my house and be safe, right?
And there's like 10 things we've just talked about.
So what I will say is if you're a US employer and the citizenship or the nationality of your business is American, your owners are American, nothing terrible happens to you if you have employees who you in good faith believed that their work authorization documents were genuine. ICE will not require employers to be document experts. Over the years, green cards have taken on very different formats and colors and look. So if the employer has good reason to believe that the document that the employee is presenting is authentic, they're fine to work off of that. If ICE comes with an I-9 audit and reveals to the employer that the work authorization is falsified, then the employer could be penalized anywhere from a fine to require them to end the employment. So on that front, I think generally employers are people I think that generally have good intentions. I'm sure you have some
Yeah.
bad actors out there who are trying to take advantage of non-citizen work. But for the most part, I think employers are trying to, do the right thing, follow the rules, do what's good for their staff. So there isn't a need to over scrutinize the work authorization documents. I think where we begin to get into, you probably want to talk to an immigration attorney or an employment law attorney, is if the nationality of the business is not American. Or,
Okay.
if your shareholders are all non-citizens, or if they're all, like majority owned, the controlling shares are not held by Americans, then you have an issue of non-compliance could then lead ICE to begin to ask questions about the owners and the management. And then those people's statuses could be in trouble. So that would be the only consideration I would say. But for the most part, nothing crazy happens to the employer if there's not.
This is interesting to me too, because a lot of companies are global. There's companies that will have, hey, we have an office in New York, we have one in San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, and we have one in Beijing, we have one in, Tokyo. Maybe we have one in Brussels, we have London, you name it. They have these offices. And so that can get tricky, right? Because it's like maybe they'll send someone from their London office, hey, go run this, get this set up for 6 months to a year. And so those documents need to be 100% right at that. You've got to really be careful there.
Yes. If that person is going to be employed in the US, they're receiving compensation for services rendered in the US, then yes, you want to make sure that they're authorized to do that. If they're sent as a representative to just sort of oversee the setup of an office, they're not actually receiving compensation for that, or they're here for just a meeting to meet with the general manager of the work site. There's a particular kind of visa for that. And generally, you don't need to worry too much about their work authorization. So it's a very lawyer answer of it depends.
Yeah. I mean, but a lot of this is like kind of it. I think that's what there's a fear of what's going on. I think employers are nervous and the employees for sure. We touched on, rates and, gave those 3 steps, which I think is really crucial for people to understand. But what happens when someone is like, okay, here, just maybe been in this country for, like I was talking about, a gentleman for 30 years, has been here, has done all his documentation, but next thing you know, you're going. Or there's right now, we've had so many cases where people are now, you are a criminal because of some behavior, maybe when they were 16 or 17 or whatever has happened. And next thing you know, you're being deported. And it's like, here, shipped out of the country, and that's that. I mean, it's a disruption in business for sure, but really for an entire family, that families are being split. So this is and I know a lot of people are like, yeah, well, they shouldn't be here. Well, why don't we all look at the history of America asking people to be here? So we're at this very interesting, weird time where I think conversations have to be had between people, and there's a lot of trust and mistrust happening. So how do we go from here legally? What should the employees start to look at? Because some people are like taking themselves home. I was listening to a gentleman where it's moving back to Kenya and is leaving his wife and kids. And I used to live in Kenya, and I'm like, you're going back to Kenya? I'll go. It's awesome. But you know what I mean? So he looked at his status and realized, I'm going to have to go there and start over or whatever. But so it seems like there's some people deporting themselves in a way.
I think from the employer side, hopefully the employer is sending messaging out to their staff very proactively on two fronts. The first one is creating an inviting, safe environment for staff to come forward if they have produced documents that are either outdated or falsified, and allowing them to have a safe conversation, a confidential conversation with HR, so that they can work out whether the employer is willing to assume risk in continuing to hire this person, or if this person is willing to assume risk continuing to work in that place. The risk isn't exclusive to the employee or the employer. It's also extending to the rest of the staff, because if ICE has decided to target a particular employee and they do a raid to come take that employee, other employees or other staffers would be caught up in that raid as well. So proactively inviting employees to come forward and to update their I-9s and all of that. There should be like an updating of the I-9s in general.
Right.
That's one topic. I think the second topic is also educating your staff proactively in the same way that you might have an earthquake preparedness drill or a fire preparedness drill. Not that you need to drill your staff, but that there is a plan, an emergency plan for if an ICE raid were to happen. There's a designated ICE communicator or designated ICE contact person who's been trained to identify the difference between the different types of warrants. Generally, it's like two different types. There's a judicial warrant and an administrative warrant. So, somebody who's able to talk to ICE calmly but assertively, read a warrant, hold ICE accountable to only doing the things that the warrant allows them to do, and to train everybody else in, if this were to happen, everybody has the right to remain silent. Please direct all questions to this person. Don't run. Things like that. So that's what I would say from the employer side. From the employee side, I would say if the workplace feels safe for you to talk to HR, if there's a question about your status or doubt about your ability to work, if you feel safe to talk to HR, have that conversation proactively make sure that your I-9 is always updated and that they have updated work authorization documents. If work doesn't feel like a safe place to have that conversation, then I would say proactively leave, just because you don't want to be in a situation where you're surprised by an ICE raid and you haven't done the homework of listing out your emergency contact numbers or having there be a way for your loved ones to be contacted if you get picked up by ICE.
Okay, because at that point, it's like that's a stopping point, right? If you get picked up, they're not going to contact your family for you. So it's cold and dry, and at that point, you may not even see your family, right?
Correct. So what used to be happening now is that the detention centers are, like bursting at the seams because there are so many people that have been detained. But ICE detention is civil detention. It's not a criminal detention. And so they're not bound by the same rules as criminal detentions. They're not obligated to offer you like one free phone call or anything like that. When I want to get in touch with my clients who are detained, they have to call me, or I need to, set up a video Zoom meeting with them through the legal visit units of the detention centers, which are all owned by private companies. So it's not like there's a standard way that anything is done. A lot of times the detainee themselves don't know where they are. So it's hard to tell their family where they are. Yeah, for all those reasons, like having a list of emergency contact, even as an individual with your family, have some sort of emergency preparedness plan, all your important documents are in one place, all of that is advisable.
So this is like getting ready for a hurricane. Like you have those kinds of, I know it sounds weird, but having been through so many disasters, you have those kinds of things set up and done. And that is something that everyone in this situation should be doing now, and do it at home and have that conversation, which is fearful, but it will be better if you do it and don't put it off, right? Because it is a reality. Ward, going on.
Can I jump in a little bit on that topic? I think we need to distinguish between two different groups of people. I think one group of people that Christina's talking about are originally here legally for sure, and maybe paperwork has gotten lapsed or something like that. And that person, I believe, should feel very free to say, hey, I need a little help with my paperwork, make sure it's okay. The other group we're talking about, well, maybe they're not here legally. And that's when you start having, need the conversation with, well, what if this happens? What are we going to do? So I really think that's probably two separate groups. Okay. And the one is maybe, doesn't have to, well, I'm not going to say doesn't have to worry about it, because you can still get picked up even though maybe you shouldn't be, or maybe you get picked up for a technicality, and that could be a problem as well. So get your paperwork right for sure if you're here legally. If you're here illegally, you got a different problem, and you really might just get swooped up. But I have to say that is a tough thing, because people who have come across the border and have set up lives here are used to certain American ways and a certain income now that they probably can't recreate if they go back. So the choice may be, do I go back and live in not a great place, maybe a dangerous place, or do I stay here and try to ride it out? And I'm telling you, because I've seen enough of this kind of thing, I know that ain't an easy answer.
It really depends on your journey and each family as well, and ages. And I mean, there are elders being shipped out, so that's a sad thing to see, and I think it's disruptive on the employer side too, because they're trying to work. And, you also, I wonder about, there are some employers that are not the nicest of people. So there are the bad actors out there that may also use this to not pay their employee as much if they know deep down. Do you see that, Christina, in anything where you really, when you say, if you don't have a safe space, you better get out? Because that employer, if it's not a safe space, that might not be the best. That could be a one-way ticket out, or a very horrible life. If so, right?
Absolutely. I think if you were able to get your work authorization through a conventional lawful immigration pathway, you probably had some sort of interaction with the Department of Labor. Your employer probably had some sort of interaction with the Department of Labor and the Immigration Service to make sure that they're not taking advantage of non-citizen labor to cut down on expenses. But if you didn't go through those channels to get work authorization, not to say that all employers are evil, but the temptation for an employer to underpay you because they don't have to pay payroll tax, or to not give you insurance because you don't have a social security number anyway. All of those things happen regularly. And I can easily see how, and Ward, you might need to comment on like what someone could do if they're in that vulnerable situation. But even if there was legal recourse, I could easily see somebody who doesn't have documentation being afraid of taking advantage of those resources simply because they would have to put their name on things, or they'd have to put a social security number on things, and it might make them or their family bigger targets.
Yeah, you've touched on a great topic for employees that find themselves in that situation. There are protections, especially in the state of California, that will protect anyone who is not being paid minimum wage, who isn't being paid their overtime. And in fact, there's a law in the books in the labor code that says you cannot discriminate against someone because they are illegal. It doesn't say it quite like that, but you can interpret it that way. You can't pick on a person even if you suspect, because that's a violation of law, and that would be something else they could go after you for. But Christina did touch on the other side of that coin, which is, well, you're still exposing yourself to some degree, and is it worth that risk? Now, more and more, I think over the last few years, I've seen more and more people that you question whether they are here legally or not, and enforcing their rights. And that's what California is about. California says, as a policy, that's what we do. We make sure that everyone's paid properly. No one's going to gyp someone who is working fairly. Well, not even fairly necessarily, is working in California. And that's just not going to happen here. We're going to enforce the law against them. So it doesn't matter your status at all. California will back you. But there are still questions of exposure and do I want to go through this? And so you do see violations of minimum wage and other things with people who may be not here with a legal status.
Sure. Well, it's there's some really interesting sides to this of not California as much, of some parts in the country that, the kids come over the border, end up over the border and be put at work, and people don't even know they exist, and they're working as kids. And it's kind of, it's almost like sharecropping, but in a worse way. We have that happening in our country I don't know if you've covered that at all, Christina, in immigration law in California as such, but I don't know if it happens in California, but I do know we have a lot of child workers in this country that have no documentation. And I wonder, in some ways, will this help them or hurt them more? I don't know, with this kind of thing, but we do have a
I'm
problem.
not sure. I mean, the two main reasons that people get trafficked or that people move across borders when they're being trafficked is labor and sex. And there are a shocking number of children who are kind of swept up in all of that. And then you also have situations where children end up in the US separated from their parents due to abuse, abandonment, or neglect. There are very specific immigration visa types that are meant for these populations of people, especially if they're children. But does that stop people from engaging in violations of child labor laws? Probably not, because, like I said, nothing terrible happens to the employer. At most, you'll be asked to terminate the employment of the non-compliant employee. That's about it.
So what,
And
when
sex
you have
trafficking is happening in California, and
oh,
not that
yes.
I know anything about it, but you hear about it from the DA, and they
Oh,
say
yeah.
this is a high priority thing.
Well,
So it's happening in
we've
California.
done shows on human trafficking, and, even I remember the first one we did, they were actually a huge target in Sonoma County, and it was really trafficking just out of the neighborhood. Like if, you had a special needs child and another person in the school will befriend, hey, come on over, give them drugs, and then they're in the ring, and that's that. Your kid's gone. So it happens in this country a lot. Christina, I was going to ask though, who is your main client that calls you? Is it people, going through an ICE raid? Is it someone coming into the country? Who's your main client?
Generally, we get people who are proactive about knowing that they have no status or that their loved one has no status, and they want to know what to do, especially as fear and anxiety increase with every new executive order, every new change in policy. We also get people calling us on behalf of people who have gotten picked up. So, like I'm probably on a call later today with somebody whose dad just got picked up over the weekend. So I mean, there are plenty of people who are still trying to immigrate lawfully and are still going through the conventional pathways to get a green card or an employment-based visa. But we do get a ton, especially being in San Diego. We're like 30 minutes from the southern border. We get a ton of phone calls, and our main detention center in San Diego County is parked right at the border. So yeah, we get a good number of phone calls from people who are either detained at the Otay Mesa Detention Center or have been briefly processed there and then transferred to all the different detention centers across the country.
Wow. And there are people, immigrating or migrating in, trying to do the right thing. And I've also heard stories of they're done all their paperwork, they've done everything, and they go in to get their final citizenship, and ICE will get them at the court steps. Are these kind of rumors or truths, do you think?
The frequency that happens is probably exaggerated, but is remarkable, like the number of detentions, ICE arrests that have happened at immigration field offices, immigration courts, and also normal courthouses. So there was, interestingly, a bunch of immigration judges got together at the beginning of the current administration, and they put together a request that ICE not be at immigration courts and not be at the field offices because they, I think rightfully, said that it would have a deterring effect on people attending their hearings or whatever. I think Christine Nome, because yeah, VHS. I think Christine Nome came back with that's a baseless claim that people will attend their hearings whether or not ICE is there. And so now ICE is parked outside of, courthouses, courtrooms, like in the hallways of courtrooms, waiting for people to come out. And so are people picked up at field offices and interviews? Absolutely. But I think weirdly, 3,000 arrests a week quota is making ICE more like efficient, so to speak. They're not doing these like sweeping, like we're just going to pick up everybody, because if they mistakenly pick up people that are US citizens or permanent or who have status, then that's people that they have to let go that don't count towards their quota. And so they're being a lot more targeted in the arrests that they are making.
Okay. So the reality is people really need to almost document every move they make in a way. Like if you're going to the courthouse, people should know you're going to the courthouse and have copies of your documents, right? So if something does happen before you get into the courtroom, there's like some kind of something to verify what you were doing, because if they try to get someone before they actually get finalized, can't that be proof of record that they were doing that and they had an appointment that day for that?
It doesn't stop ICE. And so there are these kind of not ancient, but like older immigration provisions that allow ICE to do the things that they're doing. They've never been enforced quite this way before. They've never been interpreted quite this way before. But ICE is successfully arguing in federal district courts and before SCOTUS that they're just doing what the law has allowed them to do. And on some level, their argument is compelling. So immigration laws were, I'm thinking back to the Chinese Exclusion Act of the 80s. Most of immigration law was based on exclusionary principles. The US has not been, even though we are an immigrant nation, the history of immigration law is fairly xenophobic. And so there are things in there that allow the administration to interpret the law and to execute the law in the way that they are right now. So what I would say is if you or a loved one or somebody you know is going to go to a field office or going to go to an immigration court, have that person, if they're not already represented, talk to an immigration attorney beforehand so they understand the risk of, how likely is it that they're going to get picked up by ICE who is already going to be there.
So have your ducks in the row, really. Really. And then California, know that you've got some extra protection, but still not really in some ways, right? Because, yeah. So, yeah.
Perfect.
No, it's just, it's the Wild West right now, in a way, with these kinds of changes, which is why we're doing this today, to make sure people know what to do and how to handle it. But it is different, right? So Ward, I can imagine that right now for you to make sure that your employers that you work with are doing the right thing and taking those measures, right? And getting everything together.
Well, I give advice. I'm not sure it's always taken.
Everyone's
Try
a
to give
Ward.
good advice.
Yeah. Well, anything in closing from either of you? I really appreciate you doing this. And here's the thing too. People do come over the borders that aren't great too. So there's reasons for this too. So, we're not all like one-sided here either. Things do happen. It's definitely our country's going through a shift and change, and it's not the first time that it's gone through this. But this is it's a lot of change and a lot of eye-opening times, right? To kind of look at what is legal and what's not. And I think this has been quite a year of finding out what is legal and what's not on all levels, quite frankly. Ward, and anything in closing from you for employers, employees?
Nothing specific to we've really talked about immigration. I think rightly so. That's the main thing. And Christina knows that. And so I don't have anything to add what Christina has to say. I do agree though, revisit your I-9s. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Christina, anything in closing from you?
I would say make sure that you do have that designated ICE communication person you the best what is it? The best offense is a good defense. I don't know. It's something like that. Like you want to be proactive as an employer, regardless. I mean, you can have like all different kinds of motivation for why you would want to put precautionary measures in place for a potential ICE visit. End of the day, if your audience is mostly employers, you have mouths to feed, you have a business to run, you have operations that need to move on. And you don't want an ICE visit to be so disruptive to that. So, proactively making sure that your paperwork is in order, that you have somebody who's trained to communicate with ICE in case your workplace needs that, it would just make everything smoother for everyone involved.
I think that's a really smart thing, and someone who's level-headed and doesn't get into a freak attack, you know? It's like when you go through borders, and I've lived in different countries, and you go through, you know, checking your passports and all of that. There's always, like, I always thought America's pretty easy compared to some of the places bomb checks and everything. That's kind of how I was raised. So when I got to this country, I'm like, y'all, man, stuff could go down here pretty easy, you know, and later stuff did go down, and sadly, you know, there's that fear that happens, and you cannot allow yourself to freak out. And if you freak out and you get emotional, you've got to, I would say, learn to breathe through these things, because if you emotionally lose it, I don't care. Some people giggle, which is not going to help you. Some people cry. Some people yell. Somebody start freaking out. It will escalate. You have to stay level-headed and calm no matter what. You cannot lose it. It will be used against you in some way.
Yeah.
I hate
I,
to say it, but it's
I
true.
think my parting shot would be at this moment, it's not useful to think of other human beings as the enemy, right? Like at this moment, San Diego is going to prosper, San Diego is going to flourish if we hang together, and if we not hang together, but like if we, like really help
Embrace each other,
work
community.
together and behave like the community that a city is supposed to be. And so just for the sake of, like the welfare of your fellow man and the
Yeah.
city that we live in and the ideals that we care about as a city, as a state, as a nation, I think this is a really good time to extend consideration just beyond what
Mm,
you would normally consider as like, what only affects me and mine. But
yeah.
yeah, what affects my coworkers, what affects my workplace and the community that we live in.
Losing workers is a big ripple effect to the economy.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, construction, agriculture, just off the bat, and there's so much more than that. The industries that come in from people. I mean, it's the immigration story of America is massive, and it's one of the most beautiful stories that we have too, and also some of the saddest stories. And right now is creating a new story. And I agree with you, Christina. It's like stand together as a community. That is the most important. I wanted to go to you real quick, Ward, about that, about dealing with things in a calm, collected way. You were in the military. Did you learn that kind of technique too, as to not freak out? Like you've got to kind of get to that level-headed position, even as an attorney. Like you've got to like look at the facts and stay there, and you can
I
freak
think
out later.
especially, well, I think it was kind of expected in the Marine Corps that you got to be in control. Now, maybe not to control the degree of controlling everyone else around you, but in control of yourself and being as effective as you possibly can be. So I think that was assumed, really. I don't think we taught that necessarily. But certainly in the courtroom, when you're talking to a judge, you don't want to get down a road of where you're getting too argumentative, where you're getting too spun up in your client's case. You got to keep a cool head and be able to react in a way that the judge will listen. Because if the
Mm.
judge isn't listening, you're not doing well for your client.
Is that the
That doesn't
same
mean
for
you're going
your,
to win necessarily, but you want the judge to listen to you.
yeah, is that the same for your clients as they go through things, Christina, to stay as level-headed as possible?
Absolutely. I think everyone who works in, and where this is probably true in the superior courts, everyone who's a part of the immigration machine, DHS, ICBP, the immigration judges, nobody sees themselves as the bad guy. And
Right.
everybody's trying to do their jobs, everyone's trying to live into their values. And if you go into a courtroom and you vilify anybody, it just doesn't make for a compelling argument. It sounds like Ward was saying, like overly emotional, and it doesn't sound like you're appealing to the rule of law. So absolutely what Ward said, keeping a cool head, having compelling legal arguments is what wins you your cases.
Well, there you go. Can't beat that. You got two lawyers telling you how to beat a case. Stay cool, man. I love it.
Well, sometimes you have to be persistent, though. And
Yeah.
sometimes your argument's so weak, maybe you pound the table a little bit.
No,
That's-
yeah, but you
that's-
can't. Well, I'm a musician, and I'll tell you, if you pound the table nonstop, you lose your dynamic and your song will suck.
yes, you do.
So you got to have dynamics, right? So that's too. Well, everyone, for Christina Tong, go to lawofficesofjaneoak.com. And as you know, for Ward Heinrichs, go to Best Employment Attorney San Diego. We're here every fourth Wednesday. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, Christina. Really appreciate your insight and expertise and your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ward. Have fun in the mountains. Go get some apple pie for us.
I hadn't even thought about that. I probably
I
would
bet
go.
you there's some pie there. I bet you.
Yeah. And I want to thank Christina for showing up to this too, because this was a topic that was really made for her type of law.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio's California Employment Law Podcast with San Diego attorney Ward Heinrichs. Keep up with Ward at bestemploymentattorneysandiego.com or follow him on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also subscribe to Big Blend Radio at bigblendradio.com.